Bezos Hashem, today's daf is daf Nun Aleph, and we will begin about 10 lines from the bottom of daf Nun Omid Beis Baya Rava. Again, we were discussing yesterday the union of Rakav. Rakav is corpse dust, and how the corpse dust, in order, if you take a cupful of that corpse dust and put it in a room, anybody who walks into the room becomes Tumei Mace. But in order, that's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, because really it should not work, because if you take a sheretz that totally decomposes, a dead sheretz, and totally decomposes and becomes like corpse dust, I don't know, insect dust, if you touch it, you're not tamei. It's only by humans, the corpse that is totally whole and totally pure, it's just corpse dust there. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai says that it could be mitama ba'oil and make somebody a tamei mace. But it has to be one, it's hard to understand, but it has to be a whole body. That means that the entire body was intact and it decomposed. And the Gemara said before that if one limb is missing, let's say the person lost a limb in his lifetime, so let's say he died without a hand. So when he decomposes that person, that's not corpse dust anymore, because he wasn't a complete body when he died. So here we're up to Baya Rava. One more last question in this corpse dust, and this is probably the last question that has to deal with this. Baya Rava. Rava asked a question. Hirkiv Kshuchai. A man who saw a body limb, let's take his hand, that totally decomposed while he was alive. So he has a decomposed body limb when he was alive, and then v'chazor mace, and then he died. So now you have a total body that decomposes. It's completely full of corpse dust, mahu. But would that be considered corpse dust in the effect of the halacha Moshe Sinai? Kiki miri rakav. When did we have this corpse dust? The irkiv kishuhu mace, when a whole body dissolved when he was dead. So when a body decomposes, and we saw that it has to be a naked body on a stone slab. Imagine a naked body on a stone slab totally, and it decomposes in front of your face. So all you have left over is just pure corpse dust after 30 days. So then, yes, then that was the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Or Dilma, or maybe hashta miya ha'meis. At the end of the day, this guy, hi Lewis, we're just 10 lines from the bottom of the page, 7 lines from the bottom of Nun Amid Beis. So just the Gemara is going to end with this question that we're dealing with over here. Dilma hashta miya ha'meis. But at the end of the day, you have an entire body that turned into corpse dust. So maybe it would be under the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Hashma coming here. Loy mamarta v'meisheyesh loy roiva v'roiva malay tav v'rakav taima b'chai, etc. So we have a brisa that seems to imply that a limb of a dead body could become corpse dust. So taima mishum chai, it's only because it's a live aver that we don't say it's corpse dust. Ha mace, but if it's dead, and the Gemara wants to imply from this brisa that if it decomposed while the man was alive, yesh le'rakav, it would have a din of corpse dust. Isn't that what the brisa is trying to say? So the Gemara says, no, mi katani ha-mace, as the brisa says that the person died after his aver decomposed. Hakamash malam, the brisa is talking about something else. The shum mace yesh like rekav. The concept of a dead body has the concept of corpse dust, shum chai ein le rekav. The concept of a live body does not have the ability to create rakav. Okay, so this ends the sugya of corpse dust. And as we discussed before, that this corpse dust is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So just remember it. If you have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai where a dead body decomposes on a piece of slab, a naked dead body, and it decomposes, so by the end of 30 days, all you see is a skeleton and dust, because whatever decomposed with the maggots and the flies, all is dry powder. That dry powder, if it's pure corpse dust with nothing mixed into it, halacha l'Moshe Sinai says that if you enter into that room that has just, let's say, a cupful of that corpse dust, you become tamei ba'oil ha'meis. New Gemara. Baya Rava. Rava asked the question. We know that you're not allowed to eat lettuce, some that you didn't check for the romaine lettuce? Well, you didn't check for the bugs on it. What happens? Because you're not allowed to eat bugs, right? But what happens? Namola, you find an ant shechosra that's missing a leg. Let's say, but it's alive. It's walking around, but it's just missing a leg. Maho, is it usher to eat that ant? What's the question? Shiura gemira la. When did the Torah ask you to eat an entire insect? Is only if it's complete. A complete entire insect is asur min Torah. But this ant was missing a leg, let's say, so therefore it would not be asur. Was the Torah telling you bria gemira la v'ha'ika? The Torah was telling you that if the insect can live, and it's a creature that can live even without the leg, it could be asur. And that's the case over here, that although it doesn't have a leg, but you see that the ant is still alive. So the question is, if an ant is missing a leg, is that under the isser of not to eat bugs? Amar Rav Yehuda b'diskara. The Gemara just answers this question. Tashma. Rav Yehuda from Diskarta said, I have a proof. Tashma, come in here. The Brisa says you're not allowed to touch one of the dead insects, the 8 dead insects, that if you touch them, you become tamei. Let's say a weasel or something like that. Tashma. So the Brisa is talking about what is the shear, what is the size of the item that you need to touch. If you just touch it like you touch a hair of it, you become tamei. If you touch a dead hair of a weasel, you become tamei. So what's the shear? So Tashma, the Brisa says, it says in the Torah, when these 8 shiratzim died, any one of them, a lizard, whatever it is, don't touch them. Bohem. If you're going to touch bohem in all of them, you're going to become tamei. So from the Torah, it's mashma, you have to stick your hand and touch an entire sheret in order to become tamei. But then the pasuk says yachal b'kulam. I think you have to cover the whole thing. Talmud Bavli mehem. You only have to touch a little bit of the sherets. Imehem yachal miksasim. If it says behem, then it means I would think that you can touch a little bit and you become tamei. Talmud Bavli behem. The Torah says you have to touch all of it. So the Torah gives you 2 psukim that seem to contradict each other. One pasuk says, in order to become tamei, you have to touch the entire sherets. The other pasuk says, no, you have to touch a little part of the sherets. Hakeitzad. The answer is you have to touch a part of the sherets that it's possible a sherets to be that size. What is the smallest possible living sherets? The Chachamim said it's the size of a lentil bean. That's what it says. Actually, you have to touch the entire part of a sheret, that it's possible to have a sheret that's that size. V'shi'aru chachamim, the chachamim gave you a measurement, b'cha'adasha. That means that it's the size of a lentil. Why did they pick the size of a lentil? Because the smallest insect, right before it's born, it's the size of a lentil. Shekein ha'choimet. Let's call the chaimet the snail. Chilas briosai, right when it's born, b'cha'adasha, it's the size of a snail, is the size of a lentil. So the Chacham says that in order for you to become tamei, you have to touch the sherets, a lentil part of the sherets, and then you become tamei. Now, the Gemara understands that a chaimet, a snail, could live without a leg. So why did the Chachamim give you the shear as a lentil when theoretically the chaimet, this snail, if you pull a leg off, it could still walk around, it could still be alive, but the Chachamim said that's not a complete creature. So therefore, Shema Mina, from here you understand Shiura Gemira law, that the halacha l'Moshe Sinai or the Torah was saying that it has to be an entire insect in order to be called under the prohibition of the Torah. So what you see from here is that only if you eat an ant that didn't lose a leg is it asur. But if it's missing a leg, it's not asur. So that's because we are assessing that for tumah it has to be the size of an insect, a sherets that could live. And the smallest living sherets is ka'adasha. And we don't say, oh, smaller, because you can take off the leg. Rab Shmaya says, not so. Ki be'inin shura, ki be'inin shiura, The beloy by when it's born, you need the entire insect. Right before it's born, you need the size of an adasha. The beloy kahava adasha, when it doesn't have the size of a lentil, loy metame, it wouldn't be metame if you touch it. Why? The loy naflo ba neshama. Because it's an interesting expression. There's no soul in the insect. So as long as there's no soul in this snail, let's say, so if you're going to remove a leg when it's the size of a ka'adasha, it will never get the soul into the snail. So in order for a snail to have a soul, it has to be a neshama. In order for the snail to have a neshama, it has to be the size of a lentil. But by the ant, ava naflabon neshama. But let's say you have an insect that has a radiant neshama, like the ant, the creepy crawly ant. If you, maybe the Torah was not specific, maybe you don't need it to be totally intact. As long as it can live with missing a leg or something, it still would be considered a barrier, and you are not allowed to eat it. See, biolog. So we'll remain with this question. Question always remains that if you eat an ant, that's missing a leg, were you over an Issa Daraisa or not? It's not clear. Back into the Mishnah that discussed what is Metame Sheretz. The Mishnah said, Hashidra, the spine of a human being. Remember, if you imagine a spine of a human being with all its rib cage sitting in a room, if the Nazir enters that room, he becomes Tameh. But then the Mishnah says, Vahal Gulgoylet, the skull. So the Gemara wants to know, what did the Mishnah mean? Do you need, in order to be Metama Ba'oil Amaze, to make the Nazir Tameh, or anyone Tameh, do you need the spinal and the skull? Ibaylahu. We'll ask this question. Shidra v'goylis tanam. Does the Mishnah say that you need both, the spine and the skull? Oidilma, or maybe oishidra oigilgolis. Maybe all you need is just the spine or just the skull. A skull on the table could be metama the whole room. Amar Rava said Tashma, come in here. The Brisa says Shidra. Let's say you have a spine, Shigered Roiv Il Ilin Shabbat, that all the ribs were crushed, okay, broken apart, Tahara. Then that spine is tahar, because it's not a complete spine with ribs and vertebrae attached. But uva kever, but if you look down, if you dug a grave and there's a hole in the ground, and you see a spine with a bunch of broken ribs in there, so the halacha l'Moshe Misina says that is a tameh diga. That rib cage, that spine is metama. So if you just put your hand over the hole in the ground, you become tameh. Afilu mishuberes oy mifurakrakes, even if it's broken or taken apart from the spine, tameh would be metama in a person. Mipnei hakever, because it's in a grave. The halacha l'Moshe Misina says that the grave combines them into one. So again, but we see from the beginning of the brisa, and the whole brisa seems to imply, it's the spine alone could be metama person. Tama mishum degered. The whole problem over here, this brisa is dealing with, if you have a broken ribs from a spine, holoi gered. But if you don't have a broken ribs from a spine, you have an intact spine with vertebrae and ribs coming out, tame. And you don't need the skull also. Just the spine alone could be metama a person. Shma mina. So we see from that our Mishnah meant to say oy shidra, or the spine, oy gilgoilus, or the skull katani. That's what our Mishnah means to say. That's what our Mishnah is trying to imply. And says the Gemara, it's not such a raya from that brisa. Maybe the brisa is not discussing if there's a skull. Maybe we can assume that there might be a skull in the grave, but if it's together with the spine. But the question is the spine a spine if it has broken ribs? That's the question. But it's not dealing with whether you need the skull along with that spine to be metama. Because once you have broken spine, once you have broken ribs, there is no spine anymore. And therefore, you can't combine it with a skull. So basically, is no proof from that brisa. You could read it either way. You could read it as the brisa is saying that with the spine alone, it could be metama the person, or the brisa is not getting involved whether you need the skull along with the spine to be metama. It's just dealing with the halachas of a spine. Tashima, come in here. Rabbi Yehuda says, Shisha Devarim, Rabbi Kiva Matame, B'chachama Matame. There were 6 things that Rabbi Akiva and Chachamim had an argument. And Rabbi Akiva said, oh, it's Tameh. And the Chachamim says it's Tar. But later on in life, the Chazar by Rabbi Akiva retracted and said that I'll join you that these 6 things are Tar. But now, before we get into that, what are those 6 things? That's the next part, but we're going to get to a story. Maisa, there was a story. There was a story. Let's imagine that there was a guy. There was in a hole in the ground. There was this spine and a bunch of broken bones that looked like that it came from that spine. It was a bunch of broken ribs. Now we learned before that the grave itself combines the ribs into the spine, so it should be tameh. But the question is, maybe they were just a bunch of broken ribs from a couple of different people. So look at the story. Maisa they brought sheheviu kupa malei atzomis. They brought a box full of bones. Lebesa knesses to the shul shel tarsiyim of the tanners or something like that, or the coppersmith. They had their own shul, and vehenichu ba'avir, and they put it in the. I guess maybe they were copper miners, so they found this grave somewhere, and they put it under there was an opening in the shul ceiling, because they didn't want to make everybody who walks into the shul become tameh. They left this box full of bones. Why? Because they wanted to have a doctor check it out to see, is these bones from one person or from 2 people? And because if it's from 2 people, it's not, the Chachamim say, the Chachamim will hold its tahar. A bunch of doctors, tutors, and a bunch of doctors came in, and they looked into the box, and they said, there's no spine here for 1 people. I could see the way the bones are shaped. They look to me that the pathologists determined that they came from 2 different people. Well, if it's from 2 different people, these bones are not metama, a person. So the question is, but again, they're discussing only the spine, but not there is no skull over here. So you can make an inference from the brisa. Tama de like a shidra de bechada. The whole problem that it's not metama, a person, because there was no spine from 1 person. Ha'ika, but if it was from 1 person, oy shedra, just the spine alone could be metama, a person. Oy gilgailas, or the skull from 1 person. The mechad, if it's from 1 person, Nazir megalech aleh, the Nazir would share his hair, and anybody, not just the Nazir, but anybody who walks into that room would become tameh. Shmami Nazir. So from here you can see that our Mishnah says that a Nazir becomes tameh with shidra v'gagailis. It means oy shidra, or he became tameh through just the spine, oy gagailis tanan, or he came tameh through the skull. You don't need both to be metama the person. Answers the Gemara, it's not such a proof. Loy mebaya kama. The doctors want to say, the doctors told you something that even information you don't even need to know. They kept us saying, Loy mebaya, they didn't even have to tell you, shidra v'gayils the memes echad leika, that you don't have a spine and a skull for 1 person in this box. There's not 1 skull and 1 spine from 1 person. Ella afilo, even I can't even find 1 spine from 1 person or 1 skull from 1 person. It's a bunch of different bones from a bunch of different people in here, and therefore I can't find even 1 complete spine in this box. So from this brisa, you don't have a complete proof that is oy shidra oy gagailis. Oy shidra oy gagailis. Do you need that just the spine alone or the skull alone could be metama? Or do you need both of them to be metama? So again, we're still with the question. So we're bringing another proof to try to answer this question. So Tashma, come in here. Minyana, from a final count. Mahin shisha devarim. There are 6 things. Rabbi Akiva metame. Rabbi Akiva said, "Oh, I hold it's tameh." The chachamim metahari, and the chachamim would say it's tahar. Interesting opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva holds that if you combine something from 2 different people, it could be metama, a person, like a regular mace of 1 person. For example, al aver min hameis shaba mishnei mesim. Let's say you have a limb from a dead body that came from 2 people. Let's say the limb is a type of limb that has 2 bones. 1 bone came from Reuven, the other bone came from Shimon. So Chachamim say this is tar. It's not a bone from 1 person. Rabbi Akiva says it's tameh. Same thing, if it's the limb of a live person that died, that fell off in his lifetime, that came from 2 different people. Again, 1 limb that fell off of a live person, again, then now it's metama ba'oil, but half the limb is one bone from the limb comes from Reuven, the other bone comes from Shimon. It's not tamei according to Chachamim. Rabbi Kiva says it is. Then valchatzi kav atzama shabam and shnei mesim. Let's say you have 1 liter full of bones, right? From most of the bones of the body, but you have 1 liter. It's all mixed up. But that it's the liter was combined with from 2 dead bodies that made up this measurement. Or va'aravias dam habam mishnayim. Let's say a ravias, as you know, a ravias is like a kiddush cup full of blood, right? 4 ounces, let's say, and it came from 2 different people. So according to the Chachamim, it's not tar, it's tar. It's 2 different people. Rabbi Kiva says it's tamei. Val etzem kisoira, a bone that's the size of a barley. Now, the bone the size of a barley is not metama ba'oil, only if you touch it, but not metama the room that it's in. But what happened, this barley bone, shenechalak l'shtayim, it was split in 2, like a little piece of barley split in 2. Rabbi Kiva says it's tamei, Chachamim says it's tar. So far, if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, 5 is etzem. Number 6 would be vahashidra, the spine of a person. If it comes from 2 different people, Rabbi Kiva says it's tamei, the Chachamim says tar. Number 7 is hagagolos, the skull. If you have a partial skull from one person, a partial skull from another person, according to Rabbi Kiva, they combine to be metama, and according to Chachamim, it's tar. But if at the end of the day you have 7 items over here, and the Mishnah says there's only 6, supposed to be 6. Let's go to Amid Beis, Nun Aleph Amid Beis. The Isal Kadaitich Oy Shidra Gagolis. If you count Shidra and Gagolis as 2, Hanashivle Havim, then it's 7. So must be that Shidra and Gagolis really are 1. In order for it to be metama a person, you have to have both the spine and the skull. That's because otherwise that counting doesn't make sense. And says the Gemara, no, you could still have a counting of 6 and still count Shidra and Gagolis as separate. Hikatani, when is that Brisa talking about? What is counted as for the number of 6 is only if what argued against Rabbi Kiva was the Chachamim. La puke etzem kisoira. Let's throw etzem kisoira, the barley bone that's split in half. That Rabbi Kiva said, if it's split in half into 2 pieces, it's metama, and Chachamim says not. The Yachid who the Palagalate. It's not the Chachamim arguing against Rabbi Kiva. It's one person that argued against Rabbi Kiva. It could be Rabbi Kiva held on his own and never agreed to the other side. In Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, etzem kisara, a bone the size of a barley, shenechalak l'shnayim, that's split into 2 parts. Rabbi Akiva metame, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri metar. Kiva says it's tamei, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says it's tar. So could be that Rabbi Kiva never sided with Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So therefore, let's go back to the count. So if you go back to the count, Eva min ames, Eva min achai, Chatzi kav atzomais, a revias dam, that's number 4. Etzem kitzayra you don't count. You can count Shidra and Gagolis as 5 and 6 as 2 different ones. So therefore, maybe the Brisa holds Shidra and Gagolis are 2 different, are counted as separate things. Anybody say, if you want, I can tell you, you can drop one of the avers. You can drop Avim and a mace is counted as the 6, as one of the 6. Avim and Achai is not part of the count at all, so you still have the number 6. The Ibai is saying, if you want, I can tell you. When are we counting in the 6 things that Rabbi Akiva were dealing here with? Is only those things that if a Nazir would walk into the room with this thing present, he'd become Tameh. La'apuke, but you have to exclude etzem kisara, the bone, the barley bone. That scenario is the lie, because a barley bone cannot be metama, a person entering that room. You have to actually touch the barley bone. So that's not counted as part of the 6. As part of the 6. So Mimela, if it's not counted as part of the 6, then you can count Shidra and Gagolis as separate. The Iba is saying, if you want, I can tell you, whatever Rabbi Kiva retracted, that's what's counted. That's why you have 6. So even Shidra and Gagolis are counted as separate. Revias Dam won't be counted. Revius dam loy hadebe. Revius dam that came from two different people, Rabbi Akiva never regretted that opinion. In other words, Aver minachai that comes from two different people, like one bone from one person, another bone from another person, they form an Aver. It's not matama a person. All the other things mentioned, Rabbi Akiva initially held Tameh, and then he regretted it and held Tahar. He retracted his opinion. The one thing that he never retracted his opinion is the Kiddush cup full of blood that came from two different people. There, Rabbi Akiva says, I'm not retracting. If it comes from two different people, it's Matama ba'oil, like everything, like a regular mace. The Amalei, because the Amalei Rabbi Labar Kapara, Rabbi said to Bar Kapara, Lo tishnu Revius dam b'chazara. Don't count Revius dam that Rabbi Akiva regretted it. Shahari limude Rabbi Akiva biyadai. Rabbi Akiva, he was really confident in his opinion. Ba'oid, not only that, Hamikra Messiah, he even had a pasuk to prove that he's right, because the pasuk says, "V'al kol nafshos meis lo yavoy." You can't touch a plural. Nafshos is plural of a dead body. Don't come. Nafshos, the soul of a dead body, souls plural, refers to blood, and therefore the bloods of two different people, you're not allowed to come into that room. So that's why Rabbi Akiva says, even if the Revius dam was full of blood from two different people, Rabbi Akiva held fast with his opinion that it's Tameh. And therefore, that's not part of the six. And therefore, if it's not part of the six, then you can count Shedra and Gagolis as one as separate. Rab Shimon, the Gemara just interjects with a fascinating point. The Rab Shimon Omer, Rab Shimon says, Ad Yamav Hoya Metame. Ad Yamav Hoya Metame. In Mishameis Chazal Edim Edei. Rabbi Shimon says, until his death, he was Metama. I know Rabbi Akiva held fast on his opinion about Revius dam, that if it comes from two different people, it's Tameh. But maybe when he got to heaven, Rabbi Shimon said, it's like tongue-in-cheek, he said, maybe Rabbi Akiva, when he got to heaven, he may have found out that he's wrong. Any of that, I'm not sure what he held after he died. But he's speaking a little bit sarcastic about Rabbi Akiva, that Rabbi Akiva may have realized when he got to heaven that he was totally off. So Tana, in order to atone for speaking so harshly against Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon continued to fast for the rest of his life, and then when he smiled, his teeth were black because he regretted saying such a derogatory statement against Rabbi Akiva. Tashma, this will end, but this Tashma will take us to the boy-up, to the bottom of the page. Basically, we're trying to bring a proof that when the Mishnah says that a shidra, a spine, or gegolis, or a skull is metama, do you need both, the spine with the skull, or each one separately could be metama a person? Tashma, come in here. Bishami says, Roiva atzomis min atzomim. You have 16 ounces from all the bones, which is a quarter of a calf. Let's say you have a 16-ounce, 160 ounces. I'm sorry. No, 16 ounces. 16 ounces. You have like a soda bottle full of bones, then it can be metama the room. Oy mishnayim, oy mishloisha. You can even have 2 or 3 bones. That seems strange, what Rabbi Akiva said. But Beisham says, first he says you need 16 ounces, but then he says just 2 bones alone, or 3 bones, if it weighs 16 ounces, could be metama. Or Beisilach says, roiva min agvia, you need most of the body. A roiva means you need the roiva hakav from the entire body. Even the roiv habinyan, the build, the height of the body, or roiva minyan, or you're counting up the bones, and it equals a roiva hakav. Really, you could have all the fingers and toe bones, and you crush them all, and you bring them in, you can make them 16 ounces, and that's most of the bones of the body. Because in each finger, you basically have 6 bones, according to the Chachamim. So just that alone is 120. You have to get to the number of 125. So the Gemara, the Brisa just explains what does Beis Shammai hold, what does Beis Hillel hold. And basically, they're not arguing. Amar Rabbi Shua, Yechlaini lasas divrei Beis Shammai with divrei Beis Hillel ke'echad. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are saying basically the same thing. How much bones do you need to be metama a person? Metama the room. Shebeis Shammai, I'm mishnayim or shloisha. You could get 2 or 3. What did he mean? Oy mishnei shekayim v'yarech echad. You take 2 shin bones and 1 thigh. or mishnei yorchaim, or you have two thigh bones, v'shoikech and one shin bone. Hoil v'roiv goyver shel adam. Most of the height is from those bones. So those three bones enough could be metama the whole room, because that's the height of a person. Of those three bones. Ubeis Hillel, I remember Sil says mina gavia, oimer binyan. You have another way to metama the room. If you could take tiny bones, but it's most of the bones in the body. There are 248 bones, so you need at least 125 bones to be metama. If you have 125 tiny bones in a room, the whole room becomes tameh. Hoil v'yeshnam b'mifrukei yadai v'raglaim. You just take your fingers and toes and you count all the bones in those parts of the body. You already have 120 bones. So just those bones, and you add another 5 small bones from the ear or whatever, you can get the 125. And just if you have 125 of those bones in a room, the room is tameh. Here's the point of the brisa. Shammai himself said, not the Beis Shammai, but the old Shammai said, "I feel etzem in a shidra oim in a gagoylus." Shammai says that if you have the bone of the spine or one bone of the skull, one bone from the skull, the whole room is tameh. So we see now, even if you argue against Beis Shammai, you're going to say that one bone of a shidra is not enough. You need the entire spine. One bone from the skull is not enough. You need the entire skull. But still, it's either the skull or the spine, but not you don't need both to be top of the room. So you see a clear proof that it's either or. Answers the Gemara, no proof. Shammai de machmer. Shammai was very machmir. He said that it's 2 ways he's machmir. We hold you need shidra and gagoylus, but Shammai held not only you don't need shidra, you could use either or shidra or gagoylus, but you don't even need an entire shidra. Just one bone of the spine or one bone of the skull is enough. So the Gemara says, can you interpret it the other direction? Lifne mina time of the Beis Shammai de machma. Rabbanan maybe hold the ika shidra gagoylus. So the way you're learning the brisa is that the Rabbanan hold you need both shidra and a gagoylus. So no, there's clear proof that the Rabbanan require both spine and skull. The Gemara says, "Loi, not so. You can go the other direction." Atkan lepliga Rabbanan led to Shammai. The argument between Rabbanan and Shammai is ela be'atzemecha the osim in a shidra in a gagalus. Shammai says that all you need is one tiny bone of the spine, one tiny bone of the skull, and the whole room is tameh. The Chachamim hold you need not one bone. You need the entire structure. You need the entire spinal column, or you need the entire skull. But if you have the entire skull or the entire spine, even one of them should be enough. So basically, what the Gemara just left off, and I don't think the Gemara is going to ever come back to this. Maybe it will. Is that we don't know. Maybe the Mishnah says that you need, in order to be mitam of the room, you need both the spine and the skull, or is it just either or could be mitam of the room? So far, that this question has remained unresolved. This ends Daf Nun Aleph.